If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and let us know what city you're watching from. Let's continue. The December rain fell softly over Chicago as Ethan Miller parked his car in the garage of the house that, 7 years ago, had stopped being a home and become just an address. The sprawling residence in the Lincoln Park neighborhood, with its 3 stories and a private garden surrounded by high walls, remained as impeccable as ever. Every object in its exact place, every room organized with almost surgical precision, every space far too quiet for a building of its size. The hand-painted tiles in the entryway reflected the light from the imported crystal chandelier. The linen curtains were perfectly aligned. The paintings on the walls hung at mathematically correct angles. Everything was perfect. Everything was empty. It was the Thursday before Christmas, December 19th, and Ethan knew exactly what awaited him in the coming weeks, the same meticulous routine he had repeated since Megan left. Christmas was always the hardest time. Worse than her birthday, worse than their wedding anniversary, worse even than the date when everything changed. December brought with it a silent demand for happiness, a social expectation of celebration that Ethan simply could no longer meet. Megan. The name still caused a tightness in his chest, even after all this time. She had been 6 months pregnant when the unthinkable happened. An ordinary day, a Tuesday afternoon, a trip to the grocery store to buy ingredients for dinner. Megan had called him from the parking lot, saying she was on her way home and asking if he wanted her to pick up that wine he liked. Ethan said yes, get it, and that he loved her. Those were the last words they ever exchanged. The phone rang an hour later. It was the hospital. An accident. Megan had been hit by a driver who ran a red light at high speed. The doctors did everything they could, but it wasn't enough. First, they lost the baby. Then, in the hours that followed, they lost Megan too. Ethan got to the hospital in time to say goodbye, to hold her hand as she slipped away, to whisper empty promises that everything would be okay. But nothing was okay. Nothing ever became okay again. Ethan didn't like to think about the details of that winter afternoon. He preferred to keep the memory of his wife alive, smiling, planning the nursery for the baby they never met, flipping through kids' decor magazines on the sofa, her hand resting on her rounded belly. Megan wanted a boy. She was absolutely sure, said she could feel it, that she just knew. They had already chosen the name, William Miller. The son who was never born, who never took a breath, who never had the chance to know the immense love his parents felt for him. Grief had its own rules, and Ethan had learned every one of them the hard way. In the first few months he cried compulsively, unable to function. Then came the anger, directed at the reckless driver, at cruel fate, at God. Next, the silent bargaining. What if he had left work earlier that day? What if he had offered to go to the store instead of her? What if? Finally, acceptance arrived, or something like it. A heavy resignation, the understanding that life went on, even when it shouldn't. December was the cruelest month, because it was the month she was gone. The month they should have been celebrating their son's first Christmas, holding him on their laps for pictures with Santa Claus, filling the house with colorful gifts wrapped in shiny bows. Instead, Ethan spent December enduring. Just enduring. He entered through the side door, disarmed the alarm, and walked down the hall to the kitchen. On the marble countertop, a note from the housekeeper. "Mr. Miller, I left dinner in the oven. Just needs to be heated up. Merry Christmas to you." He gently crumpled the paper and threw it in the trash. Merry Christmas, as if happiness was still part of his vocabulary. Ethan was 42, a civil engineer by trade, and had built a solid commercial construction company. After losing Megan, he threw himself into work with obsessive dedication. The company thrived, contracts multiplied, but his personal life withered until it became a sequence of identical days. Wake up, work, come home, eat dinner alone, sleep, repeat. In the first few years, his older sister, Catherine, insisted on visiting constantly, bringing food, concern, and unsolicited advice. Over time, she realized her presence only intensified Ethan's discomfort, so she switched to weekly calls and only showed up on obligatory holidays. Catherine was a lawyer, divorced, a mother of 2 teenagers, and had a firm opinion on everything, especially on the fact that her brother was wasting his life. Ethan poured himself a glass of whiskey and walked to the living room. The Christmas tree was already up, the work of the same efficient housekeeper who cleaned the house 3 times a week. He had never asked her to decorate for Christmas, but Mrs. Olson insisted every year, saying that a beautiful house like this couldn't go without decorations. Ethan never had the heart to forbid it. He simply ignored the tree, the lights, the symbols of a celebration that had lost all meaning for him. He sat in the leather armchair, the same one where Megan used to curl up with a book on Sunday afternoons and watch the city through the large window. Chicago was lit up, decorated, vibrant. Outside, people were rushing to buy gifts, plan holiday dinners, gather with family. Inside, Ethan just existed. His cell phone vibrated in his pocket. A text from Catherine. "Ethan, confirming Christmas lunch at my place. Don't even think about making an excuse, so..." He typed a short reply. Confirmed. He knew that refusing would be worse. Catherine would mobilize half the world to convince him, and in the end he would give in anyway. Better to just accept and avoid the hassle. The next morning, Ethan was in his office when his secretary knocked on the door. Andrea had worked with him for 5 years. She was competent and discreet, qualities he valued above all else. "Mr. Miller, a message came in from the temp agency. The person you hired to look after the guests' children during the holidays wants to confirm a few details. She asked if she could stop by your house tonight to go over the schedule." Ethan frowned. He had completely forgotten about that detail. In October, during a business meeting in New York, he had arranged for 3 executives to stay at his house between Christmas and New Year's. It was a business strategy. He had plenty of space, and keeping his partners close would facilitate negotiations for a major project they had been developing for months. The 3 were bringing their families, including small children, and Catherine had suggested he hire someone to look after the little ones while the adults discussed business. "That's fine. Tonight at 8, Ethan said, turning his attention back to the document spread across his desk. He worked later than usual, as he always did. When he got home, it was almost 8 o'clock. He changed quickly into jeans and a light-colored button-down shirt and went downstairs to wait for his visitor. The doorbell rang at precisely the agreed-upon time. Punctuality was something Ethan appreciated. He opened the door and was met by a young woman, probably in her early 20s, with long brown hair pulled back in a high ponytail and a polite smile on her face. She had delicate features, attentive, brown eyes and the expression of someone accustomed to handling delicate situations. She wore black dress pants, an impeccably ironed white blouse, and a grey blazer that was likely from a department store, but was well cared for. She carried a discreet folder under her arm, the kind used for important documents, and had a professional posture that wasn't rigid, but rather the result of a conscious effort to make a good impression. "Good evening, Mr. Miller. I'm Julia Fisher from the Happy Kids Agency. I'm here to confirm the details for the temporary job. I hope I'm not late." Ethan glanced at the clock on the entryway wall, 8 o'clock on the dot. "You're right on time, good evening." He nodded and stepped aside to let her in. It was then that he noticed. Behind Julia, half hidden by her mother's legs, but observing everything with boundless curiosity, was a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 3, maybe 4 at most. She wore a little red dress with white polka dots that looked handmade, with white lace details on the sleeves and hem. A large red bow, matching the dress, was clipped to her dark, wavy hair that fell over her narrow shoulders. Black patent leather shoes, slightly scuffed at the toes but carefully polished, reflected the light from the entryway chandelier. The girl held a faded teddy bear in her free hand, clearly well loved and well used. Ethan felt his stomach churn. He hadn't expected Julia to bring her daughter. He hadn't mentally prepared for the presence of a child. He couldn't even remember the last time a child had been in that house. Maybe his nephews, years ago, when they were still little, and Catherine insisted on visiting more often. "I'm so sorry for bringing my daughter, Mr. Miller," Julia said quickly, her voice filled with embarrassment and a hint of restrained desperation. The person who usually watches her had a last-minute emergency, an urgent family matter, and I had no one else to call. I swear she won't be any trouble at all. She's very well behaved and will sit quietly while we talk. I even brought a coloring book and crayons to keep her busy." The little girl let go of her mother's hand with determination and took 2 confident steps into the house, as if she were entering an enchanted castle. Her wide eyes scanned the entryway, travelled up to the crystal chandelier hanging from the high ceiling, slid across the beige and gold wallpapered walls, and stopped on the paintings of European landscapes that Ethan and Megan had bought on a trip to France years ago. The child spun on her heels, taking in every detail with an intensity that unsettled Ethan. Then she saw it. The Christmas tree in the corner of the living room, visible through the open doorway from the hall. Her eyes lit up in a way Ethan hadn't seen in so long. He'd forgotten what it looked like. Pure joy, genuine enthusiasm, unfiltered wonder. "Mommy, look!" Her voice was crystal clear, high-pitched, vibrant. "Look how beautiful. It has a gold star on top, and the ornaments are sparkling, and there are twinkling lights." Julia gently but firmly held her daughter by the shoulders, her voice low but carrying maternal authority. "Laura, remember what Mommy said at home. When we go to work, you need to be a good little girl, quiet and polite. We're in someone else's house." Laura nodded obediently, her dark curls bouncing with the movement, but her eyes continued to scan every detail of the room as if memorizing it all. Ethan felt something strange in his chest. It wasn't anger, definitely not anger. It wasn't exactly annoyance either, though there was a hint of that. It was a more complex, deeper feeling that he couldn't quite name. Maybe it was just surprise, or maybe it was the painful recognition of everything that house never had and never would have. It had been years, 7 years to be exact, since a child had entered that home. 7 years since the dreams of children's laughter, hurried footsteps in the hallways and toys scattered on the floor had been buried along with Megan and William. "Please, have a seat," he said, his voice coming out hoarser than he intended. He gestured to the 3-seater sofa in light beige leather. "I'll get you some water, or would you prefer something else? Juice? Soda?" "Water is perfect, thank you," Julia replied, gently guiding her daughter to the sofa. He went to the kitchen, filled 2 glass tumblers with filtered water, and stood at the sink for a few extra seconds, taking a deep breath, composing himself. Through the open door he could hear Julia's voice, low and soft, explaining something to Laura. He couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakably that of a mother instructing her child on proper behavior. When he returned to the living room, Laura was sitting next to her mother on the sofa, swinging her short legs that didn't reach the floor, her black patent leather shoes reflecting the ambient light. The teddy bear was in her lap, but her eyes were fixed on Ethan with a disarming frankness. He placed the glasses on the fine wood and glass coffee table and sat in the armchair across from the sofa, maintaining a respectable distance. Laura continued to stare at him without blinking, as if trying to solve a complex puzzle. Then, without any preamble or social nicety, without understanding that there are questions adults simply don't ask each other, much less strangers, she asked, "Do you live here all by yourself?" Her voice was crystal clear, direct, devoid of any filter or malice. It was just pure, simple curiosity. Julia was visibly embarrassed, her face flushing slightly. "Laura, you don't ask that. We've talked about this. Some things are people's private business." But Ethan surprised himself by answering, "Yes, I do." The girl tilted, her little head to the side. "It's very big for just one person, don't you get scared?" "Laura, please," Julia murmured, her voice thick with shame. "No, I don't," Ethan replied, settling into the armchair opposite them. "What about you? Are you scared to sleep alone?" "Nope, I sleep with my mommy. We share a bed because our apartment is small, but I like it. It's warm." Julia took a deep breath, clearly mortified. "Mr. Miller, I'm so sorry. Let's get straight to the point. I've brought my identification, first aid course certificates, and references from previous jobs. The agency should have already sent all this to you, but I thought it was important to bring it in person." Ethan accepted the folder and glanced through the papers without much attention. He was more interested in observing the interaction between mother and daughter. Julia was clearly dedicated, careful, but there was a subtle weariness in her eyes. Laura, on the other hand, was pure contained energy, curiosity in its rawest form. "Everything's in order," Ethan said, handing back the documents. "The job will be from December 26th to January 2nd. 3 children ages 2 to 6. The parents will be in the house during the day, so you'll mainly be responsible for activities, games, and supervision. In the evenings, when the adults have dinner, you'll eat with the children in the kitchen and then put them to bed." Julia nodded, taking notes in a small notepad. "Perfect. Any dietary restrictions I should know about? Any specific routines the parents mentioned?" While the two discussed practical details, Laura slipped off the sofa and walked over to the Christmas tree. She gently touched a red ornament, making it spin, and smiled to herself. "Mr. Miller, is this your tree?" Her voice interrupted the adults' conversation. "It is," he replied, noticing that Julia was about to scold her daughter again. "But I didn't decorate it. The person who works here did." "You don't like Christmas?" The question hit Ethan like a punch. He was silent for a few seconds, unsure how to respond. How could he explain to a 3-year-old that Christmas reminded him of everything he had lost? "I used to," he said finally, "but that was a long time ago." Laura walked over to him, stopping just inches from the armchair. "Why did you stop liking it?" Julia stood up quickly. "Laura, that's enough. We need to go. Mr. Miller is busy." But the girl didn't move. She looked at Ethan with a seriousness that was surprising for someone so small. "My grandma went away too. Mummy said she turned into a star. Now she lives in the sky and watches over us from there. Did you lose someone too?" The silence that followed was thick, heavy. Ethan felt his throat tighten. Julia was mortified, not knowing what to do. Laura, however, continued to look at him with that brutal yet compassionate frankness that only children possess. "Yes, I did," Ethan answered, his voice coming out hoarser than he intended. Laura nodded as if that explained everything. "That's why you're sad. I can see it in your eyes." Julia took her daughter's hand firmly. "Mr. Miller, please forgive me. Laura is still learning about boundaries." "It's all right," Ethan said, surprising himself again. "She's just being honest." Laura, before being pulled away by her mother, took one last step toward Ethan and held out her small hand. "If you want, you can spend Christmas at our house. Mummy makes roast chicken and rice pilaf, and I help make the cornbread stuffing. It's yummy." Ethan looked at the outstretched hand, so small, so confident. Something inside him shifted, a feeling he hadn't experienced in so long he no longer knew what to call it. It wasn't pity. It wasn't embarrassment. It was a fissure, a crack in the wall he had built around his own heart. "Thank you for the invitation, Laura. I'll think about it." The girl smiled, satisfied, and finally allowed her mother to lead her to the door. Julia was visibly shaken, murmuring apologies as she grabbed her purse and folder. "Mr. Miller, once again, I'm so sorry, Laura, is very spontaneous. She doesn't understand yet that not all questions should be asked." "It's all right, Julia. She's just a child, a very smart one at that." Julia managed a tired smile. "Thank you for understanding. We'll see you on the 26th, then." Ethan nodded and closed the door after they left. He stood in the entryway for a long moment, listening to the sound of his own thoughts. The house seemed even quieter than before, as if Laura's brief presence had highlighted the emptiness that had always been there, but that he had learned to ignore. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. He lay in the king-size bed he once shared with Megan, which now seemed far too large for one person, staring at the white ceiling illuminated by the soft light filtering through the window, replaying every second of the scene in the living room. Laura's direct questions echoed in his mind like a distant but insistent bell. The naive, spontaneous, completely improbable invitation for Christmas. The way she had identified the sadness in him so easily, as if she were reading words written in large letters on his forehead. "Did you lose someone too?" The question reverberated, multiplied, gained weight with each mental repetition. How long did he plan to keep living like this, trapped in the past like an insect in amber, unable to move on, breathing but not truly living, taking up space in the world but not participating in it. 7 years. 7 years of automatic existence, 7 years of waking up, working, coming back to an empty house, eating alone, sleeping alone, and repeating it all the next day like a robot programmed to perform the same tasks indefinitely. He got up at 3 in the morning, after 2 hours of tossing and turning, unable to shut off his mind. He put on a robe over his pajamas and walked barefoot down the second-floor hallway to the room at the end, on the left. The room that had been prepared for the baby. The door was closed, as it had been for the past 7 years. Ethan turned the knob slowly, as if afraid of waking someone, and went inside. The light from the hallway partially illuminated the space. The room was exactly as he remembered it, as if time had frozen in this specific part of the house. The solid wood crib, chosen by Megan after weeks of researching the best models, was disassembled and leaning against the side wall, covered by a white sheet that had collected a thin layer of dust. The curtains with light blue clouds and yellow stars still hung from the windows, faded by sun exposure but still intact. The nursing chair that Megan had chosen so carefully, testing 5 different models at the store until she found the one with the perfectly angled backrest, was positioned in the corner near the window, also covered by a protective sheet. On the opposite wall, there was still pencil marks where Ethan had started to install shelves for children's books. Megan wanted their son to grow up surrounded by books, saying that reading was the greatest gift they could give a child. She had bought at least 20 picture books before the baby was even born, now stored in a cardboard box in the built-in closet. Ethan turned on the light in the room for the first time in years. The fluorescent bulb flickered twice before stabilizing, fully illuminating the space. There was a mobile of stars and moons hanging from the ceiling, above where the crib would have been. A white dresser with a changing table on top, still with the price tag stuck to the side. A fluffy, cloud-shaped rug, never used. Everything preserved like a museum of pain, a shrine to what never was and never would be. He sat on the polished hardwood floor, leaned his back against the cold wall and let the tears come. He didn't try to hold them back, didn't try to be strong. He cried in silence, as he did on the rare occasions he entered that room. He cried for Megan, for the vibrant, full-of-life woman who had been torn from him so brutally and unexpectedly. He cried for the son he never got to meet, who never had the chance to open his eyes, to breathe, to be held in his father's arms. He cried for the family the 3 of them never had the chance to form, for the Christmases they would never celebrate together, for the conversations they would never have, for the first steps he would never see, for the words he would never hear. He cried for the loneliness that had become his most faithful and cruelest companion, for the large empty house that echoed his solitary footsteps, for the bed where he slept alone every night, for the meals he ate in silence, for the absence of voices, laughter, life. But this time, something was different. For the first time in 7 long years, Ethan cried not just for the devastating loss of the past, but also for the frightening yet fascinating possibility of the future, for the vivid memory of a 3-year-old girl who had looked him straight in the eye and said he looked sad, for the memory of the innocent and sincere invitation to spend Christmas with her and her mother, for the absurd, improbable, perhaps even ridiculous, but at the same time tempting idea that maybe, just maybe, there was another way to live that wasn't just surviving. The next morning, Ethan woke up with swollen eyes and a strangely clear mind. He showered, got dressed, and went to the office as he always did. But throughout the day, he noticed his concentration was off. He thought about Laura. He thought about Julia. He thought about the simple, sincere invitation he had received. In the late afternoon, Catherine called. "Ethan, everything okay? You sound distracted." "I'm fine, Catherine. Just tired." "You work too much. You need to rest. By the way, just confirming, you're coming for Christmas lunch, right?" "Yes, I'll be there." "What a miracle. I thought you were going to give me some last-minute excuse." Ethan sighed. "I'm not making an excuse. I said I'll be there." "Great. The kids will be happy to see their uncle. How long has it been since you've seen Peter and Isabella?" Ethan did the math in his head. It must have been about 6 months. No, more. Almost a year since Isabella's 15th birthday. It's been a while, he admitted. Exactly. They miss you, Ethan. You're the only uncle they have. I know, I'll make it up to them. After hanging up, Ethan thought about his niece and nephew. Peter was 17 and in his senior year of high school. Isabella was 16 and lived glued to her phone. He barely knew them, really. He barely knew his own sister, to be honest. Not for a lack of love, but for a lack of presence. The following week passed quickly. Ethan immersed himself in work, finalizing contracts, reviewing projects, preparing the house for the guests who would arrive right after Christmas. Mrs. Olson went all out with the cleaning, changed the linens in the guest rooms, organized towels, and made sure everything was perfect. On Christmas Eve, Ethan had dinner alone as always, a simple meal, without excess, without meaning. Afterward, he sat in the living room with a glass of whiskey and looked at the lit-up tree. He thought of Megan. He thought of the baby who was never born. He thought of Laura and the invitation she had made. For the first time, Ethan allowed himself to imagine what it would be like to accept, to show up at Julia's house with a bottle of wine, sit at a simple table, eat roast chicken and rice pilaf, and listen to Laura's laughter. It would be strange. It would be uncomfortable. But it would also be different. And different, at that moment, seemed better than the same. But he didn't go. Of course he didn't. Ethan Miller was not a man of impulse. He was not a man who took risks. He had built walls too high around himself, and those walls couldn't be torn down by an innocent invitation from a 3-year-old child. Or could they? On Christmassy Day, Ethan woke up early at 6 in the morning, as he always did, even on a holiday. He showered, put on grey slacks and a light blue shirt, and spent some time deciding whether to bring something to Catherine's house. He ended up choosing an expensive bottle of red wine, wrapped it, and left the house early. He drove slowly through the empty streets of Chicago, looking at the decorated houses, the families in the windows, the children playing with new toys. The sun was bright, and the sky was completely blue. He stopped at a coffee shop, had a double espresso, killing time. At 11:45, he drove to Catherine's house in Evanston. The residence had a well-kept garden with colourful flowers and a wooden swing. The door was ajar, and Christmas music was playing inside. The house was cheerful, noisy, full of life. Peter and Isabella were in the living room playing a video game, sitting on the floor, shouting commands at each other. Isabella wore a new red dress and had painted her nails gold. Peter was taller than Ethan remembered, wearing shorts and a Chicago Bears t-shirt. Catherine greeted him with a tight hug, wearing a red apron over a green dress. "I thought you were going to stand me up at the last minute," she said, smiling. "You look tired. Didn't sleep well?" "I said I'd come," Ethan replied, ignoring the second part of her question. "And you did. Christmas miracles do happen." She pulled him inside and closed the door. In the dining room, the table was already partially set with a white tablecloth, porcelain dishes that had belonged to their mother, and crystal glasses. The turkey was still in the oven, but the delicious aroma already filled the entire house. Lunch was pleasant. The food was delicious. Catherine was an excellent cook. Roast turkey, stuffing with bacon and sausage, mashed potatoes, green bean casserole. Peter talked about his college applications for the following year, torn between engineering and law. Isabella showed pictures from a school trip to Miami. The kids were polite, asking about their uncle's work, but Ethan couldn't stop thinking about another dinner, another family, in a place completely different from this one. He thought of a little girl in a red dress with white polka dots, the same girl who had looked at him with those piercing eyes and said he looked sad. He thought of Julia, who was probably at that very moment preparing roast chicken in a simple kitchen, in a house he didn't even know the location of. He thought about what it would be like to be sitting at a table where his presence was truly wanted, not just tolerated out of family obligation and politeness. Catherine noticed his distraction. "Ethan, are you okay? You seem a million miles away." "Just tired," he lied. "You work too much. You need to get a life outside of the company." "I have a life, Catherine. Work isn't a life, little brother. This is life, family, friends, moments together." "I know." But he didn't know, or rather he knew it intellectually, but didn't feel it. Because for Ethan, Work was the only refuge that still made sense. Work didn't demand emotions. Work didn't ask why he was alone. Work didn't judge him for having survived when Megan and William hadn't. When he returned home in the late afternoon, around 6 o'clock, the sun was setting. The house was exactly as he had left it, empty, silent, impeccable. Ethan went up to his room, changed out of his dress, clothes into shorts and a t-shirt, and stood at the window overlooking the private garden. He watched Chicago light up, the surrounding houses with their windows aglow. Somewhere in this city, he thought, Julia and Laura were having dinner together, maybe laughing. Maybe Laura was telling her about the big house she had visited, about the sad man who lived alone. Tomorrow, Ethan thought, feeling something strange in his chest that could be classified as anticipation. Tomorrow, Julia would start her job at his house. Tomorrow the guests would arrive with their families and their children. Tomorrow the house would be temporarily filled with voices and footsteps and life, even if it wasn't his life. And more importantly, tomorrow, Laura would be there, in his house, bringing with her that inexplicable energy, that boundless curiosity, that frank way of asking questions no one else dared to ask. Ethan didn't know it yet, couldn't fully comprehend it at that moment standing by the window as Christmas night advanced outside, but that thought made him smile for the first time in a very, very long time. A small, shy, almost imperceptible smile, but a genuine smile, the first in 7 years of lonely Christmases. December 26th dawned with a cloudy sky and a fine drizzle typical of Chicago. Ethan woke up earlier than usual at 5 in the morning and lay in bed for almost an hour, staring at the ceiling and trying to understand the strange feeling that had settled in his chest since the day before. It wasn't exactly anxiety, though a hint of it vibrated at the edges of his consciousness. It was more like anticipation, expectation, an energy he couldn't classify or control, something he hadn't felt in so long he had completely forgotten what it was like to experience this emotion. He tried to rationalize. It was just guests arriving, just a temporary job being done, just children who would be in the house for a few days and then leave, letting everything go back to normal. But there was something more, something tied to the memory of curious brown eyes, of direct and unsettling questions, of a child's voice saying he looked sad, but that stars watch over people even after they become stars. The guests would arrive throughout the afternoon. 3 executives from the construction industry, with whom he had been negotiating a major project for months to build a mixed-use commercial complex in the Chicago metropolitan area. The investment was considerable, the stakes were high, and keeping the partners close during the holidays would facilitate the final negotiations set for the first days of January. Robert Anderson was coming with his wife Patricia and their 4-year-old twin sons. Frank Peterson was bringing his wife Clara, 7 months pregnant, and a 6-year-old boy named Lucas, and Mark Costello would arrive with his wife Sylvia and a 2.5-year-old girl named Beatrice. They would all be staying at the house until January 2nd, when they would return to New York, where they came from, and Julia would start her job that same day, at 9 in the morning as agreed. With or without her daughter, Ethan wasn't sure. Ethan showered, put on jeans and a navy blue polo shirt, and went downstairs for breakfast. Mrs. Olson was already in the kitchen, preparing everything to welcome the guests. There were fresh breads, cakes, sliced fruit, various juices. The whole house smelled of freshly brewed coffee and cornbread. "Good morning, Mr. Miller. Everything's ready to receive the group. The rooms are spotless, towels changed, everything in its place." "Thank you, Mrs. Olson. You always do an excellent job." The woman in her 60s smiled, pleased. "Oh, and the young lady who's going to look after the children is coming today too, right? Julia?" "That's right, at 9. It's good to have children in the house. It's been so long, it'll bring some life to this place." Ethan just nodded and drank his coffee in silence. Mrs. Olson was right. The house needed life. But he didn't know if he was ready for what that meant. At 8:55, the doorbell rang. Ethan was in his office reviewing some documents. When he heard the sound, his heart inexplicably sped up. He went down the stairs quickly, crossed the entryway, and opened the door. Julia was there, punctual as always, wearing dark jeans, a white, long-sleeved shirt, and comfortable sneakers. Her hair was down this time, falling over her shoulders in natural waves. She carried a backpack and a cloth tote bag, and next to her, holding her hand firmly, was Laura. The girl wore light denim overalls with a yellow shirt underneath. Her hair was in 2 braids that hung over her shoulders. She held the same teddy bear from the last visit, and had that curious sparkle in her eyes that Ethan already recognized. "Good morning, Mr. Miller," Julia said, her voice slightly tense. "Once again, I apologize for bringing Laura. The lady who watches her went out of town for New Year's with her family and won't be back until the 3rd. I had no one to leave her with. I tried to find someone, but with the holidays, everyone is busy or traveling." Ethan looked at Laura. The girl smiled at him, a wide, genuine smile that lit up her small face. "It's no problem," he heard himself say, surprising himself. "She can stay. I promise she won't interfere with my work. I brought toys, coloring books, modeling clay. She'll be fine. Don't worry, Julia. It's really not a problem." He stepped aside, and the two entered. Laura immediately let go of her mother's hand and walked into the living room as if she already knew the way. Ethan watched her, noticing how she moved confidently through the space, lightly touching objects, admiring the still-decorated Christmas tree. "The guests will be arriving throughout the afternoon," Ethan explained, closing the door. 3 families, 7 children in total. They'll be in the rooms on the 3rd floor. You'll be working mostly up there in the playroom we've set up. Mrs. Olson, the housekeeper, has already organized everything. Julia nodded, making mental notes. "Got it. Any restrictions I need to know about? Specific meal times?" "Breakfast will be served between 7 and 9, lunch at 12:30, dinner at 8. The children will eat with you in the kitchen at 7 before the adults. Mrs. Olson will have everything prepared." "Perfect." Laura appeared beside them, tugging insistently at Ethan's hand. "The house is very pretty. Do you have a lot of rooms?" Ethan looked down at the small hand holding his. When was the last time someone had held his hand like that? He couldn't remember. "I have 7 rooms," he replied, his voice softer than he intended. 7. That's a lot. And you use all of them?" "No. Most of them are empty." "Why? Don't you have a family?" Julia hurried to intervene. "Laura, that's enough questions. Mr. Miller has things to do, and so do we." But Ethan found himself answering. "I have a sister and 2 nephews, but they live in another house." "Oh, and your wife? Is she traveling?" The silence that followed was thick. Julia was visibly embarrassed, her cheeks flushing. Ethan felt the familiar tightness in his chest, but this time the pain was different, less sharp, more bearable. "She passed away 7 years ago," he said, surprised by his own frankness. Laura looked at him with those piercing eyes. "That's why you're sad. I knew it." Before Julia could scold her daughter again, Ethan knelt to be at the girl's level. "You're very observant, Laura, but do you know what I've noticed?" "What?" "That some people can see sadness in others because they have very kind hearts. And I think you have a heart like that." Laura smiled, pleased with the observation. "My grandma used to say I was an angel, before she became a star." Ethan felt something shift inside him, a strange warmth, an emotion he couldn't quite name. He stood up and met Julia's gaze. She had tears in her eyes, but she was smiling. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Laura is very direct. She's still learning about boundaries. You don't need to apologize. I prefer honesty." The rest of the morning passed quickly. Ethan showed Julia where everything was in. The house explained routines and introduced her to Mrs. Olson. Laura followed them in silence, observing everything attentively. When they reached the playroom on the 3rd floor, specially prepared for the visiting children, the girls' eyes widened. The room was filled with new toys still in their packaging. A dollhouse, cars, building blocks, children's books, educational games, costumes, a colorful rug on the floor. Ethan had bought everything following a list the agency had provided, without much thought. Now, seeing Laura's reaction, he realized how much it all represented. "Is this for real?" the girl asked, her voice full of wonder. "All of this is for playing?" "It is," Ethan confirmed, "for you and the other children who are coming." Laura ran to the dollhouse and reverently stroked its colorful plastic walls. At my school, there's a house like this, but it's for all the kids together. Here, there's a whole one just to play with." Julia watched her daughter with a complex expression, a mix of joy at seeing Laura so happy and sadness at not being able to provide that at home. Ethan noticed and felt a pang in his chest. "Laura can play as much as she wants," he said. "All the toys are here for that." "Thank you, Mr. Miller, that's very generous of you." The first families began to arrive around 2 in the afternoon. Robert Anderson and his wife Patricia arrived first, with their twins Peter and Paul, 2 identical boys with blonde hair and boundless energy. Next came Frank Peterson with his wife Clara, 7 months pregnant, and their son Lucas, a shy 6-year-old who hid behind his father's legs. Last to arrive was Mark Costello with his wife Sylvia, and their daughter Beatrice, a 2.5-year-old who wouldn't stop crying from travel fatigue. Julia immediately took control of the situation. She introduced herself to all the parents professionally, calmly took the children, and led them to the playroom on the 3rd floor. Laura accompanied her, acting as a helper and an example for her new friends. Ethan was impressed by her competence. In a few minutes, Julia had transformed 5 restless children into an organized group, sitting in a circle on the rug, listening to a story she told with different voices for each character. Even little Beatrice had stopped crying and was fascinated by the narrative. While the adults settled into their rooms, Ethan watched the scene from the playroom doorway. Julia was sitting on the floor surrounded by the children, gesturing dramatically as she told the story of a princess who saved a kingdom. Laura was beside her, mimicking her mother's gestures, completely absorbed in the story. Something inside Ethan broke at that moment, or maybe it mended. He wasn't sure. But for the first time in 7 years, seeing that warm, domestic scene, he allowed himself to imagine what it would have been like if Meghan and William were alive, if that house were full of life and laughter, if he weren't alone. The afternoon passed in a blur of activities. The children played, had an early dinner under Julia's supervision, took baths, and were put to bed. The adults had dinner at 8, discussed business and plans, and retired to their rooms around 11. The house finally fell silent. Ethan was in the 2nd floor library when he heard light footsteps on the stairs. It was Julia coming down after checking that all the children were asleep. "Mr. Miller, sorry to bother you. I just came to let you know that all the children are asleep. Laura too, she was exhausted." "Great. You did an excellent job today." "Thank you, they're wonderful kids, well-behaved and affectionate." Ethan hesitated for a moment before continuing. "Julia, have you had dinner?" She seemed surprised by the question. "Yes, I have. I ate with the children in the kitchen." "But did you eat well? A full meal?" Julia smiled, touched by his concern. "I did. Mrs. Olson made a delicious meal. Chicken stroganoff with rice and potato sticks. The kids loved it." "Good." A comfortable silence settled between them. Julia seemed about to say good night when Ethan spoke again. "Laura is a very special girl." Julia's face lit up with maternal pride. "She is. Sometimes it scares me how perceptive she is. She sees things adults don't. She noticed my sadness the first time we met." Julia nodded, her eyes welling up. "She has an unusual sensitivity. I think it's because she experienced the loss of her grandmother so young. My mother passed away when Laura was just 1.5 years old. Since then, she talks about stars, about people becoming angels. It's her way of processing the absence." Ethan felt a deep connection to that revelation. So Laura knew grief, too. She also carried absences. "I'm sorry about your mother. Thank you, it was hard, especially since I was a single mother and my mum was my only support. After she was gone, it was just the 2 of us, me and Laura against the world." "And her father?" Julia looked away, her face hardening slightly. "He never wanted to be involved. When he found out I was pregnant, he disappeared. Never showed his face, never paid child support, never wanted to meet his daughter. It hurt a lot at first, but over time I realized it was for the best. Laura deserves people who truly love her." Ethan felt a surge of anger toward this unknown man who had abandoned Julia and Laura. How could anyone abandon a child like Laura? How could anyone give up the privilege, the honor, of knowing that incredible little girl? How could someone look at a pregnant woman and just turn their back, disappearing as if none of it was their responsibility? She's very lucky to have you as a mother. You're an exceptional mum. Julia smiled, but it was a tired smile, heavy with years of struggle and sacrifice. I do what I can with what I have. I work a lot, sometimes 3 different jobs at once to make ends meet. I nanny during the week for families who can afford it. I work weekends at kids' events, doing entertainment at birthday parties, face painting, blowing up balloons. I do cleaning jobs when I need extra cash urgently, when the rent is late or when Laura needs something important. Anything to give her a decent life. It's not the life I dreamed of when I was younger, not the life I planned to have, but it's our life, it's what we've built. It's together, she and I. Ethan was deeply impressed by the strength of the young woman before him. Julia couldn't be more than 25, practically a girl herself, completely alone in the world with a young daughter to raise, and yet she maintained her dignity, her professionalism, her hope. She didn't complain, didn't play the victim, didn't blame anyone. She just did what needed to be done. You're doing an absolutely incredible job. Laura is living proof of that. She's polite, intelligent, sensitive, compassionate. Anyone can see she was raised with a lot of love. Thank you, Ethan. It means a lot, really, to hear that from someone, especially when you're tired and sometimes wonder if you're doing everything right. You can just call me Ethan. She seemed hesitant. I don't know if that would be appropriate. You're my employer. Even so, I prefer Ethan. Julia nodded, a shy smile on her lips. Okay, Ethan. The name sounded different coming from her. Soft, warm. Ethan realized he liked the way she said it. Do you live far from here? In Bridgeport. I take 2 buses to get to Lincoln Park. 2 buses every day? It's the routine. I'm used to it. Ethan frowned. And tomorrow you're going to go home and come back early in the morning? That's the plan. I leave here around 11 at night, get home at 12:30, sleep a little, and leave again at 7 in the morning to be here by 9. But that's insane. You'll barely sleep. Julia shrugged. It's part of it. I need the money from this temp job. It'll help pay off the back rent and buy school supplies for Laura next year. Ethan made an impulsive decision. You're not doing that. You and Laura are staying here. Julia's eyes widened. What? No, I can't. That would be inappropriate. Why? The house has 7 bedrooms. 5 are occupied. 1 is mine. That leaves a guest room on the 2nd floor, far from everyone else. You and Laura can stay there. It's much more practical. You save time, you save money on bus fare, you get more sleep. It makes perfect sense. But Ethan, I can't accept. What will your guests think? They'll think I was sensible to offer accommodation to their children's nanny. It's logical, practical, and convenient for everyone. Julia hesitated, clearly tempted by the offer. Are you sure? I don't want to be a bother. I'm absolutely sure. I'll ask Mrs. Olson to prepare the room tomorrow morning. You just need to bring your things. Julia took a deep breath, her eyes shining. I don't know how to thank you. You don't have to. It's only fair. She nodded, too emotional to speak. Ethan felt a strange warmth in his chest. He was doing the right thing. He knew it. In the following days, the house's routine changed completely. Julia and Laura settled into the guest room on the 2nd floor, a comfortable space with a queen-size bed, a reading chair and a private bathroom. Laura was enchanted with the room, running from one side to the other, jumping on the bed, opening the empty drawers. Their presence transformed the dynamics of the house in a surprising way. The mornings were filled with children's voices, laughter, hurried footsteps. The kids adored Julia, who told stories, organized games, and put on impromptu plays. Laura served as her assistant and role model, helping the younger ones, sharing toys, and showing them how to behave. Ethan, who normally spent his days locked in his office, began to find excuses to come out and circulate around the house. He needed to get a book from the 3rd floor library. He needed to check on something in the playroom. He needed to talk to Mrs. Olson in the kitchen. There was always a plausible reason to be nearby. And always, inevitably, he would cross paths with Laura. The girl had an incredible ability to appear at the most unexpected moments. Ethan was reviewing a contract in his office when she walked in, without knocking, carrying a sheet of paper and colored pencils. Ethan, can you help me draw a house? He looked at her, surprised. First, by the familiar way she called him, without the Mr., without formality. Second, because no one had entered that office in years without being invited. But instead of scolding her or sending her away, he found himself saying, "Of course, come here." Laura climbed onto the chair next to him and spread the paper on the desk. She had already started the drawing, crooked lines forming something that could be a house or a box, he wasn't sure. "I'm making a house for my mommy," Laura explained. "A big house with a yard and a room just for me." Ethan picked up a pencil and began to draw straight lines, gently correcting the girl's drawing. "And where is this house going to be?" "Here in Chicago. But not in Bridgeport, in a pretty place with trees." "Why not in Bridgeport?" Laura wrinkled her nose. "It's noisy there are too many cars, and our apartment is small and the ceiling drips when it rains." Ethan felt his chest tighten. "You don't like living there?" "I like it because my mommy is there, but I'd rather live in a house like this," she said, pointing to the drawing they were making. "Together. With space to play. And maybe a dog." "A dog?" "Yeah. I've always wanted a dog, but we can't have pets in our apartment. The landlord doesn't allow it." Ethan looked at Laura, at this little girl who dreamed of such simple things. A house with a yard, her own room, a dog, things he had in abundance and had never valued. If you could have any dog in the world, what would it be? Laura thought seriously about the question. A golden Labrador or a cute mutt. It doesn't really matter, I just want a dog to play with and hug. At that moment, an idea began to form in Ethan's mind. An absurd, impulsive, perhaps irrational idea, but an idea that made him smile for the second time in 7 years. A few days later, on the cold, grey morning of December 30th, Ethan left the house early without telling anyone, without explanation. He returned at noon carrying a cardboard box with holes strategically punched in the sides for air circulation. From the box came small, sharp, anxious barks and the desperate scratching of tiny claws trying to escape their temporary confinement. He entered through the side, Tedotor trying to be discreet, and went straight to the living room. He carefully placed the box on the polished hardwood floor and stood there waiting, his heart beating faster than it should. What was he doing? This was completely impulsive, irrational, maybe even inappropriate. But he couldn't regret it. He didn't want to go back. It didn't take long for the noise to attract attention. Laura came running down the stairs, drawn by the barks echoing through the house. She was wearing a little blue dress with white flowers, her hair loose over her shoulders, her feet bare. When she saw the mysterious box in the middle of the room, she stopped immediately, frozen in place, her eyes widening until they seemed to take up half her small face. "What is that?" Her voice came out in a hushed whisper, as if she were afraid the box would disappear if she spoke too loudly. "Why don't you open it and find out for yourself?" With her little hands visibly trembling with barely contained excitement, Laura slowly approached the box, knelt beside it, and opened the cardboard lid with reverent care. A chubby, clumsy golden Labrador puppy immediately jumped out, its soft fur shining even in the diffuse light of the cloudy day. The puppy had dark, bright eyes, a pink tongue hanging out, and floppy ears that bounced with every movement. It couldn't have been more than 2 months old. The puppy threw itself at Laura with the enthusiasm of one who has finally found freedom after hours of confinement. It licked her face vigorously, leaving warm trails of saliva on her cheeks. It wagged its short, thick tail so hard that its whole body swayed from side to side. It nibbled her fingers with tiny baby teeth, causing no pain, only tickles. Laura screamed. It wasn't a scream of fright or fear, but of absolutely pure, unfiltered joy. She hugged the puppy so tightly that Ethan was genuinely afraid she might hurt it by accident. But the puppy seemed to love all the attention, wriggling in her lap, exposing its soft pink belly for her to pet, licking every inch of skin it could reach with its enthusiastic tongue. Is he mine? Is he real? Laura looked at Ethan with tears streaming freely down her face, wetting her cheeks and dripping onto the puppy's golden fur. Did you really give me a real puppy? He knelt beside her, moved by the reaction he had caused. He's yours. If your mum says it's okay, of course. The final decision is hers. "Mommy!" Laura yelled with all the impressive force her small lungs could muster. "Mommy, come down here, come down now, quick, it's an emergency!" Julia ran down the stairs in seconds, clearly frightened by the urgency in her daughter's tone. She thought something serious had happened. Her eyes were wide, and her breathing was rapid. "What is it? What happened? Are you hurt?" When she finally processed, the scene unfolding in the middle of the living room, when she saw her daughter sitting on the floor with a puppy in her arms, when she noticed the overturned cardboard box, and Ethan kneeling beside Laura, watching everything with a gentle expression, Julia stopped in her tracks. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out for several long seconds. "Ethan?" Her voice finally worked, but it came out weak and confused. "What is this? Where did this dog come from?" He stood up slowly, suddenly completely unsure of what he had done. The confidence he had felt when buying the puppy evaporated under Julia's bewildered gaze. "I know I shouldn't have done this without talking to you first. It's completely inappropriate to make a decision like this without consulting the child's mother. But Laura mentioned a few days ago that she always wanted a dog, and I started thinking it might be a good idea to have a pet here, now that there are kids around and constant activity. The house was so quiet for so long. But if you think it's inappropriate, inconvenient, I can absolutely return him. The breeder said he'd take him back within 48 hours if it didn't work out. So there's no final commitment yet." Julia looked at her daughter for a long time, who was hugging the puppy as if it were the most precious and fragile treasure she had ever held, then turned her eyes back to Ethan. There were tears welling up, threatening to overflow at any moment. "You didn't have to do this, you really didn't. It was very generous, but I don't know if I can accept. I know I didn't have to, but I wanted to. Very much. Why? Why do this for us? You barely know us." Ethan didn't know how to answer with complete honesty. Because Laura deserved to have her dreams come true. Because seeing her genuinely happy made him feel something other than emotional emptiness for the first time in 7 endless years. Because he desperately wanted to repay the incredible kindness of this child who had invited a lonely, melancholic stranger to spend Christmas at her humble home. Because in just a few days, this little girl had stirred something inside him that had been dormant for so long he couldn't even remember what it felt like. "Just because," was all he could manage to say out loud. "That's all because I wanted to." Julia wiped away the tears that finally spilled over and ran down her cheeks. She took a deep breath, trying to compose herself. She knelt beside her daughter, who was still completely absorbed by the puppy wriggling happily in her lap. "Laura, honey, what do you think? Do you really want to keep the puppy?" Laura nodded with such force and enthusiasm that her dark curls bounced wildly. "Yes, Mommy, I really, really want to. I'll take super good care of him, I promise. I'll give him food, fresh water every day, I'll walk him, I'll give him baths, I'll brush his fur, I'll play with him, I'll teach him tricks. But there's one important thing, Laura," Ethan said, choosing his words carefully. "The dog will have to live here, at my house. He can't go to your apartment. Do you understand that? Do you understand that you won't be able to take him with you when you leave?" Laura's face fell visibly, her joy temporarily replaced by an expression of confusion and sadness. Her big eyes filled with fresh tears. "So he won't really be all mine? I won't be able to sleep with him in my bed at night?" Ethan looked at Julia, who was watching the scene with an incredibly complex expression, a mix of gratitude, worry, joy, and something else he couldn't quite identify. "He'll be ours," Ethan explained gently. "Yours, your mom's, and mine, a shared dog. You can visit him whenever you come here. You can play with him, walk him, take care of him. But he'll live here because there's more space. There's a yard where he can run and play." Laura thought deeply for a long moment, her small face scrunched, in serious concentration. She looked at the puppy dozing in her lap, already exhausted from all the excitement. She looked at her mother, seeking silent guidance. She looked at Ethan, trying to understand what it all meant. "Okay," she said finally, her voice small but determined. "I'll share, but I want to name him. Can I do that?" "Of course you can. What name do you want him to have?" "Sul, because he's bright gold, like the sun in the sky." Ethan smiled, feeling something warm expand in his chest. Saul is a perfect name for him. Laura hugged the puppy again, this time gently. Hi, Saul, I'm Laura, and I'm going to be your best friend forever. Julia stood up and approached Ethan. Thank you, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Thank you for making my daughter so happy. Thank you for showing us that there's still genuine kindness in the world. I don't know how I'll ever repay you. You don't have to repay anything. Seeing Laura like this is repayment enough. She held his hand for a brief moment. The touch was light, chaste, but it sent an electric current up Ethan's arm and through his entire body. He looked into her brown eyes and saw gratitude, yes, but he also saw something more, something that scared and attracted him at the same time. Julia quickly let go of his hand and turned her attention back to Laura. Come on, sweetie. Let's get Saul some water and food. I'm sure he's hungry and thirsty after all that excitement. Laura stood up, carefully carrying the puppy as if it were a fragile, priceless treasure. Ethan watched them walk toward the kitchen, Laura chattering non-stop to Saul, explaining each room of the house, promising worlds of love and care. At that precise moment, with Laura and Julia disappearing through the kitchen door, with the house finally filled with genuine life and joyful noise and constant movement, with the sound of children's laughter echoing through hallways that had been silent for so long, Ethan Miller felt something he hadn't felt in exactly 7 long, lonely years. He felt real hope. He felt the concrete possibility that maybe life could be different. He felt that the walls he had built around his own heart were beginning to show cracks, small fissures through which light could penetrate after so long in the darkness. And for the first time since Megan and William left, leaving him alone in a world that seemed to have lost all its color, Ethan didn't try to fix the cracks. He didn't try to rebuild the walls. He didn't try to protect himself. He simply let the light in. The days following New Year's brought a routine Ethan never imagined possible. The guests left on January 2nd, taking their families back to New York, satisfied with the deals that had been closed. The contract was signed, the project was approved, but Ethan could barely think about it. His mind was occupied with other things, with the sound of laughter echoing through the house, with Saul's joyful barks as he ran through the halls, with Laura asking 1,000 different questions every hour, with Julia smiling as she prepared breakfast in the kitchen. Julia's temporary job had technically ended, but Ethan found reasons for her to stay. He needed someone to help organize some important documents. He needed someone to look after Saul while he was at the office. He needed company for dinner because Mrs. Olson had left early. There was always a plausible excuse, and Julia, though she clearly saw what was happening, accepted with a discreet smile. Laura was practically living at the house now. Her room on the 2nd floor was completely personalized, with drawings on the walls, toys scattered about, and the teddy bear resting on the headboard. She woke up early every morning, ran downstairs to play with Saul in the yard, and spent her days exploring every corner of the enormous residence as if it were her private amusement park. Ethan, who once avoided any interaction beyond the strictly necessary, now found himself looking for excuses to leave his office and spend time with them. He helped Laura with jigsaw puzzles. He taught Saul to sit and shake. He talked with Julia about trivial matters he once would have considered a waste of time. And for the first time in 7 years, he laughed, truly laughed. It was on one of those sunny January afternoons, while Ethan was playing carefree with Laura and Saul in the yard he had transformed into a children's play area, that Catherine showed up unannounced. She parked her luxury car in front of the house, got out with a determined and serious expression that Ethan knew well, and rang the doorbell insistently, with an almost aggressive urgency until Julia answered. "Good afternoon. I'm Catherine Miller, Ethan's sister. Is he home?" Julia immediately sensed the tension in the air, the poorly disguised hostility in the tone and posture of the elegantly dressed woman before her. "Of course, please come in. He's in the backyard playing with my daughter." Catherine entered without a word of thanks, her eyes scanning every detail of the house like an investigator. She noticed Laura's toys scattered in the living room. She noticed the children's drawings taped to the refrigerator with colorful magnets. She noticed the dog's water bowl in the corner of the kitchen. She noticed everything that indicated this house was no longer the silent mausoleum it used to be. She walked through the house, following the sound of genuine laughter coming from the yard. When she reached the glass door leading outside, she stopped abruptly at the scene before her. Ethan was sitting casually on the manicured lawn, completely relaxed, wearing faded jeans and an old Chicago Bears t-shirt she hadn't seen in years. Laura stood beside him, small and energetic, throwing a worn-out tennis ball for Saul to fetch, with canine enthusiasm. The dog ran clumsily across the yard, tripping over its still disproportionate paws, but always returning triumphantly with the ball firmly in its mouth. They were all laughing. Ethan was laughing in a way Catherine hadn't seen since before the tragedy that destroyed his life. "Ethan?" Catherine's voice cut through the joyful moment like a sharp blade. He turned quickly, surprised and visibly uncomfortable. "Catherine? What are you doing here? You didn't say you were coming." "I came to visit you. It's been weeks since we've really talked. Not since Christmas, actually. You don't answer my calls. You don't reply to my texts." She glanced meaningfully around, assessing the situation with the trained eyes of an experienced lawyer, skilled at identifying problems and inconsistencies. "Can I talk to you? In private?" Ethan stood up slowly, brushing grass off his jeans. "Laura, sweetie, keep playing with Sol out here. I'll be right back, okay?" "Okay, Ethan. And Sol says okay, too." They went inside and straight to Ethan's office on the second floor. Catherine closed the door behind them with more force than necessary and crossed her arms defensively, the rigid posture of someone about to start a confrontation. "Ethan, what exactly is going on in this house?" "What do you mean, what's going on? I don't understand your question." "Don't play dumb with me. There's a young woman living in your house with a small child. There's a dog you clearly just bought. The house is filled with kids' toys. You're smiling, laughing, playing in the yard as if the last 7 years never happened. As if Megan and William never existed. As if nothing happened." Ethan felt anger begin to boil. "Catherine, choose your next words very carefully." She sighed, her voice softening slightly but still laced, with deep concern. "Ethan, please, just listen to me calmly. Her name is Julia, right? She was hired temporarily to look after your guests' children over the holidays. Laura is her daughter, and yes, apparently you bought the girl an expensive dog. Now tell me honestly, don't you think this is all happening a little too fast, a little too intense?" "No, I don't. I think things happen when they're supposed to happen." Catherine shook her head in frustration. "Ethan, what is the problem exactly? Why are you here interrogating me as if I've committed a crime?" "The problem, Ethan, is that I know you. I know you better than anyone else in this world. And what's happening here isn't you. You're getting attached to these people in a dangerous, rapid way without thinking about the consequences." "Dangerous? What do you mean, dangerous? They're good, honest, hard-working people." Catherine approached her brother, placing her hands on his shoulders. "I watched you completely destroy yourself when you lost Megan and William. I watched you spend 7 straight years not truly living, just existing, breathing but not alive. You became a shadow of the man you were, and now suddenly, out of nowhere, a young, beautiful woman with a charming little daughter shows up, and you're instantly a completely different person. Transformed. Like you flipped a magic switch. You honestly don't find that the least bit strange, the least bit suspicious?" Ethan pushed his sister's hands off his shoulders. "I think it's just life getting back to what should be normal. I think it's me finally climbing out of the hole I've been buried in for years." "Dangerous? What do you mean, dangerous?" Catherine stepped closer, her voice softer but still full of worry. "I watched you fall apart when you lost Megan and William. I watched you spend years not really living. Now suddenly a young, beautiful woman with a little girl shows up, and you're completely different. Don't you think that's strange?" "I think it's just life getting back to normal." "It's not normal, Ethan. You're projecting. You're seeing the family you lost in this woman and child. You're trying to fill a void with people you barely know." Ethan felt anger rise. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, I do. I know you better than anyone. And I know when you're putting yourself in emotional danger. This woman, does she know you have money?" "Of course she does. And doesn't that seem convenient? A single mother with a child to raise suddenly finds a rich, lonely man. Ethan, open your eyes. She could be taking advantage of you." Catherine's words hit Ethan like punches. "Julia isn't like that. She's honest, hard-working, dignified." How do you know? How long have you known her? 2 weeks? 3? And you're already letting her live in your house, giving her expensive gifts, getting emotionally involved. This isn't right. What's not right is you coming here to judge my life. I'm not judging. I'm protecting you. I'm your sister. I saw you destroy yourself once, and I won't let it happen again. Ethan took a deep breath, trying to control his emotions. Catherine, I appreciate your concern. I really do. But you're wrong about Julia. She's not taking advantage of me. If anything, I'm the one taking advantage of her and Laura's company. You're blind, Ethan. You're so desperate for companionship, for a family, that you can't see what's obvious to any outsider. And what's so obvious? That you're replacing Megan with a stranger, that you're trying to turn her daughter into the child you lost, that this is going to end very badly for everyone involved, especially you. Ethan felt something break inside him. It wasn't just Catherine's words. It was the doubt they planted. What if she was right? What if he really was projecting his unfulfilled desires onto these two people? What if he was being unfair to Julia and Laura, using them to fill voids that could never be filled? I need you to leave now, he said, his voice hoarse. Ethan, please, listen to me. No. You've said what you came to say. Now leave. Catherine looked at her brother for a long moment, her eyes filled with tears and frustration. Fine, I'll go, but think about what I said. Think with your head, not with your broken heart. She left, leaving Ethan alone in the office with toxic thoughts swirling in his mind. Her words echoed, multiplied, gained strength. What if she was right? What if he was fooling himself? That night, Ethan could barely look at Julia and Laura. He ate dinner in silence, answered Laura's questions with monosyllables, and avoided Julia's worried gaze. After dinner, he locked himself in his office, claiming urgent work. Julia knocked on the door around 10 o'clock. Can I come in? Yes. She entered and closed the door behind her. Did something happen? You've been different since your sister left. I'm just tired. Ethan, I'm not an idiot. I felt the tension. Did she say something that upset you? He looked at Julia, really looked at her. He saw a young, beautiful, strong, brave woman. He also saw someone who was financially dependent on the work he provided. He saw complexity where he had once seen only simplicity. Julia, I think we need to talk about the situation. What situation? You and Laura staying here. Me giving expensive gifts. This is all getting confusing. She turned pale. Confusing how? I don't want you to feel obligated to be here because you need the money. I don't want Laura to build expectations about a life we can't have. Ethan, what are you talking about? I've never felt obligated to do anything. I'm here because you offered, and because it's more practical for work, and Laura loves being here because you're kind to her. Or because she sees things that aren't there, because I let her see things that shouldn't be there. Julia crossed her arms, her voice growing colder. Your sister said something about me, didn't she? She just pointed out some obvious things I was ignoring. Like what? Like the fact that I barely know you. Like the fact that this all happened too fast. Like the fact that I might be projecting the family I lost onto you and Laura. Tears began to form in Julia's eyes. And you believe that? I don't know what to believe anymore. I see. She wiped the tears with the back of her hand. Then I think it would be best if Laura and I left tomorrow. Julia, wait. No, Ethan. You've made it very clear what you think. I won't stay where I'm not welcome, and I definitely won't let my daughter get attached to someone who isn't sure if he wants us around. I didn't say I don't want you around. But you didn't say you do either. And you know what I've learned in life? When someone has doubts about you, it's because the answer has already been decided. Good night, Ethan. She left before he could reply. Ethan was left alone in his office, his heart heavy and his mind in turmoil. Had he done the right thing by creating distance, or had he just made the biggest mistake of his life? The next morning, when he came down for breakfast, Julia and Laura's bags were already packed in the living room. Laura was clutching her teddy bear tightly, her eyes red from crying. Sewell was lying at her feet, sensing that something was wrong. You don't have to go, Ethan said, his voice weak. Julia remained firm. Yes, we do. We can't stay where we're causing confusion. Thank you for everything, Ethan, really. You've been very generous. To us. Laura slowly approached him. Ethan, did I do something wrong? Ethan's heart broke. No, Laura. You didn't do anything wrong. You're perfect. Then why do we have to leave? I like it here. I like playing with Sewell. I like you. The tears Ethan had been holding back for days finally fell. He knelt in front of Laura and hugged her. I like you too, little one, a lot. So can we stay? He looked over Laura's head at Julia. She looked away, but pain was written all over her face. No, Laura, you have to go, Laura. Started to cry. I don't want to go. I don't want to leave Sewell. I don't want to leave you. You can visit Sewell whenever you want, Ethan lied, knowing he would probably never see them again. Julia took her daughter's hand. Let's go, Laura. We have to go. They walked out the door with their bags. Ethan stood frozen in the entryway, unable to move. Sewell barked desperately, trying to follow Laura. The house fell silent again. The following weeks were the absolute worst of Ethan's life, since that terrible day he lost Megan and William. Every morning he woke up expecting to hear Laura's light footsteps running down the stairs. Every afternoon he expected to hear Julia's soft voice humming in the kitchen. Every night he ate dinner alone at a table that seemed too big, too empty, too cold. The house returned to the suffocating, oppressive emptiness that had been its natural state for 7 straight years. The silence was deafening. Sewell became deeply depressed, flatly refusing to eat and spending his days lying in the exact spot where Laura used to sit on the floor to play with him. The dog would sometimes whimper softly, a sad sound that broke Ethan's heart into smaller and smaller pieces. Mrs. Olsen asked constantly, every day, about the cheerful girl and her kind mother, unable to fully understand what had happened to drive them away so suddenly. Ethan had no answer that made sense. How could he explain that he had let fear and insecurity destroy the best thing that had happened to him in years? Ethan desperately tried to return to his old routine, to the life he had before Julia and Laura appeared, working obsessively for 12 or 14 hours a day until his eyes burned and his mind went numb from exhaustion, eating dinner alone, food that had no taste, sleeping poorly, waking up tired and repeating it all the next day. But it didn't work anymore. It just didn't work. Because now he knew exactly what he was missing. He knew what it was like to have life pulsing through the house. He knew what it was like to laugh genuinely. He knew what it was like to care deeply for someone other than himself. He knew what it was like to love again. On the eve of the 1-week anniversary of Julia and Laura's departure, Ethan hesitantly entered the second-floor room they had temporarily occupied. Mrs. Olsen had already cleaned and organized everything, as she always did with efficiency. The linens were changed, the towels replaced, the polished floor gleaming. Everything was impeccably clean and utterly empty, as if they had never been there, as if it had all been a good dream that ended too soon. But then Ethan saw it, forgotten or perhaps intentionally left under the queen-size bed where mother and daughter had slept cuddled together every night, a crumpled piece of paper. He knelt, picked up the paper, with visibly shaking hands, and smoothed it out with reverent care. It was a drawing made by Laura with her favorite colored pencils, 3 figures drawn with childish but unmistakable lines, holding hands in a human chain. A golden dog beside them, tongue out, tail wagging happily. A large house drawn in the background with many windows and a red door. Green trees surrounding everything. A bright yellow sun in the top right corner. And at the top of the page, written in the shaky, uneven letters of a child still learning, was the word that completely shattered Ethan's last defenses: family. Ethan held the crumpled paper with both hands, trembling uncontrollably. Family. That's exactly what they had been to him. Not cheap substitutes for Megan and William, not convenient projections of unfulfilled desires, not fantasies created by a mind desperate for company, but a new family, different, imperfect, but absolutely real. And he had sent them away out of pure, cowardly fear, for allowing the toxic voice of doubt to speak louder than the clear voice of his heart. for choosing the safety of isolation over the vulnerability of love. With the drawing still in his hand, Ethan ran downstairs, grabbed his phone from the office desk and called Julia. The phone rang 4 times before going to voicemail, her recorded voice politely saying she couldn't answer at the moment. He hung up and tried again. 4 more rings. Voicemail again. He tried a 3rd time, a 4th, a 5th. Always the same result. She was deliberately ignoring his calls. Desperate, he sent texts. The first was short and direct. "Julia, please pick up. I need to talk to you. It's important." No response. He sent another. "I'm sorry for everything. I was wrong. I know I was wrong. Please give me a chance to explain." Nothing. A third. "Is Laura okay? Are you okay? I'm worried." Absolute silence from the other end. In a growing desperation that threatened to suffocate him, he called the Happy Kids agency that had originally recommended Julia. He vaguely explained the situation without going into embarrassing detail and managed to get Julia's full address in the Bridgeport neighborhood from the reluctant receptionist. He jotted down the address with a trembling hand, thanked her and hung up. He grabbed his car keys, got Saul's leash and called the dog. "Come on, Saul, we're going to get Laura, we're going to bring them home." Saul barked for the first time in a week, his tail wagging frantically. He jumped into the passenger seat when Ethan opened the door and sat there, panting with anticipation, as if he knew exactly where they were going and why. Ethan drove through Chicago as if he were racing against time. He ran yellow lights that were about to turn red. He sped on straightaways where he would normally be cautious. He drove through neighborhoods he barely knew, rigidly following the GPS on his phone. From sophisticated Lincoln Park to the simpler, working-class Bridgeport. From modern, expensive buildings to old, worn-down housing complexes. Julia's apartment was in a 4-story walk-up, the exterior paint peeling in several places to reveal the grey plaster underneath. Clothes hung from makeshift lines on the balconies. Children played in the small courtyard. An elderly doorman eyed him with suspicion as Ethan entered, carrying Saul. He climbed the narrow, dimly lit stairs to the 3rd floor, his heart pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat. He found apartment 302 at the end of a damp hallway that smelled of mildew and cooking. He took 3 deep breaths before he could raise his trembling hand and knock on the faded brown wooden door. Footsteps inside. The door opened to reveal Julia. She was wearing an old robe over simple pajamas, her hair in a messy bun, her makeup-free face revealing dark circles under her eyes. She froze when she saw Ethan standing there with Saul in his arms. "Ethan." Her voice was hoarse with surprise. "What are you doing here? How did you get my address?" "I need to talk to you, to both of you, please, just a few minutes." Laura came running from behind, her mother before Julia could answer. "Saul, Ethan!" she cried with pure joy and threw herself into his arms, hugging both man and dog at once. "I knew you would come. I told Mommy you would come get us. I knew it." Julia sighed deeply, her shoulders slumping in weary resignation. "Come in, but don't be long. I have to leave for work in an hour." The apartment was tiny, a living room that doubled as a bedroom, with a twin bed where mother and daughter slept together, a kitchen the size of a closet, a bathroom so small one. Person could barely fit, but it was clean, organized, and full of love. Ethan put Sol on the floor and the dog immediately ran to Laura, licking her face with enthusiasm. Julia stood by the door, her arms crossed. "What do you want, Ethan?" He took a deep breath. "I was wrong, so wrong. I let fear speak louder. I let doubt blind me. And in the process, I hurt the 2 most important people in my life." Julia said nothing, just waited. "Catherine was wrong. I'm not projecting anything onto you. I'm not trying to replace Megan and William. What I feel for you and Laura is real, it's new, it's different, and I was too much of a coward to admit it. And what is it that you feel exactly?" Ethan looked at Laura, who was watching everything intently. Then he looked at Julia. "I fell in love with both of you, with the way Laura sees the world with brutal honesty and infinite tenderness, with the way you fight every day to give your daughter a decent life, with the way you turned my house into a real home, and I know it's fast, I know it's scary, I know there are 1,000 practical complications, but I also know that it's real." Julia wiped away the tears that began to fall. "Ethan, you sent me away. You said you were confused." And I was. I was terrified, because for the first time since I lost Megan, I was truly feeling something, and that scared me more than anything. But these days without you have shown me something important. They've shown me that I can honor the past without being trapped in it. I can love what I had with Megan and still open my heart to something new. And what if you change your mind again? What if in a month you decide it was all a mistake? I won't change my mind. I'm absolutely sure. Laura tugged at his hand. "Do you want us to come back and live in the big house?" Ethan knelt in front of her. "If your mom will let you, yes. I want that very much. And we'll be a real family, like in my drawing?" He looked at Julia. "We will. If your mom will give us a chance." Julia was silent for a long moment. "There's a lot we need to talk about expectations, about boundaries, about how this will work. I know, and I'm willing to talk about all of it. No rush, on your time." "And what if it doesn't work? What if we find out we're too different?" "Then we'll find out together, but at least we will have tried." Julia took a deep breath. "Okay, we'll try, but slowly, Ethan. Carefully. Laura is already too attached to you. I can't let her get hurt." "I would never hurt her. Or you." Laura jumped for joy. Saul barked along with her. Julia smiled through her tears. They spent the rest of the afternoon in the tiny apartment, talking about everything. About fears, hopes, expectations. About how to organize the practical things. About how to present the situation to Catherine and to the world. When night fell, Ethan took them back home. The big house in Lincoln Park that finally felt like a real home. Laura ran through the hallways with Saul, laughing. Julia stood at the door watching her daughter, a soft smile on her face. Ethan approached her. "Thank you for giving me a second chance. Thank you for coming to get us." They didn't kiss. They didn't hug. It was still too soon for that, but they stood side by side watching Laura play, and for now that was enough. The following months brought gradual but profound changes. Julia left the exhausting jobs that consumed her time, and with Ethan's support went back to school. She had always dreamed of studying education, of working with children professionally. Now she had that chance. Laura enrolled in a private school near the house, where she quickly made friends and thrived. She remained the perceptive and honest child she had always been, but now she had stability, security, a place to call home. Ethan had to face Catherine in a difficult conversation. She was skeptical at first, overly protective, but over time she saw how her brother had changed, how he laughed again, how he lived again. And eventually she accepted it. Not without reservations, but she accepted. The relationship between Ethan and Julia grew slowly, carefully. Long talks at night after Laura was asleep, dinners together, walks in the park with Saul, shy kisses that gained confidence. It wasn't easy. There were arguments, insecurities, moments of doubt, but they worked through it together. A year later, on a Sunday afternoon, the three of them visited the cemetery where Megan was buried. Ethan brought fresh flowers and stood before the headstone for a long moment. Laura held his hand. "Was she pretty?" the girl asked, looking at the photo on the headstone. "She was beautiful, inside and out." "Do you still love her?" "I'll always love her. She was a very important part of my life." "And us? Do you love us too?" Ethan looked at Julia, who was watching the scene with teary eyes. "I love you in a different way, not less, not more, just different. The heart has room for a lot of love, Laura." The girl thought for a moment. "I think Megan would be happy to know you're not sad anymore." "I think so too." They stayed for a few more minutes in respectful silence, then walked back to the car together. It was a beautiful January day, the sky blue, the sun warm. Laura ran ahead, chasing a butterfly. Julia intertwined her fingers with Ethan's. "Are you okay?" "I am. For the first time in a long time, I'm really okay." They went back home, the house that once symbolized emptiness and now represented fullness, where Laura's drawings decorated the refrigerator, where Saul slept on the sofa, where laughter echoed through the hallways, where love had found room to grow again. Because Ethan had learned the most important lesson of all. Grief doesn't have to be a life sentence. Starting over isn't a betrayal of the past. It's honoring it with the courage to keep living. It's allowing your heart to expand enough to embrace both the memory of what was and the possibility of what can be. And in that house that was no longer empty, a different, imperfect but real family was building its own story. A story of second chances, of love found in the most unexpected place, of healing that comes when you least expect it. It was a story of a new beginning. And like all good new beginnings, it was just the start of something much bigger. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Ethan, Julia, and Laura has deeply touched your heart. If you were moved by this journey of loss, grief, and new beginnings, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments which moment in this narrative marked you the most. Every day we bring intense stories like this one, revealing the most human and emotional side of life. Stories that teach us about love, forgiveness, second chances, and the courage to live again, even after the greatest pain. We look forward to seeing you in the next episode with a new story that will touch your soul.